Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at today's The Hindu newspaper Delhi edition and thereby analyze the articles relevant for your prelims as well as the mains examination. Now, while discussing these articles, we shall also be discussing the aspect of answer writing. In couple of these articles, we shall be taking up a practice question and discuss the answer writing aspect as well. I would suggest all of you that afterwards try to write and create the answers on your own and thereby improve your skills in the answer writing. Now, before we move on into the topics, an announcement, a very important announcement for all you candidates who are preparing or who are planning to prepare. We have announced and we have basically announced a significantly discounted price for the product for 15-month UPSC subscription, and that has been provided at a discounted rate of 23,999. Now, under this, you will get a host of various different services, from live sessions that you can attend for different educators. You will be given one-to-one mentorship as well, paper evaluation, mains test series, all of that you will get in this price. So that is something which you should avail. So complete GS plus CSAT plus test series along with unlimited access to all batches is something which shall be available to you. So do utilize this. This is a limited time offer, and please thereby ensure that your preparation is on the track. Now, moving on to the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for today. So today in total we are going to have a discussion for 7 topics. So first is living in denial about unemployment. Now, this is an article which has appeared in the editorial section, and this is about the various data pointers released about unemployment. You had the government claiming something and you had the counter argument as well. We are going to keep this discussion free from any particular kind of political inclination. We are going to just take out the crux of this and try to understand what are the issues associated with unemployment. Now, this has appeared in page 8. This is relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, the promise of parametric insurance. Now, what is this concept of parametric insurance? How is it associated with disaster management and also with the aspect of climate change? So that is something we are going to understand again for the purpose of your GS paper 3. Then, wrong-headed policy. Now, this talks about the recently passed or the recently introduced bill in the Karnataka Assembly, which was then withheld, and that was about the reservation in employment for the local population. So, what that policy lacks and why that policy is not something which is advisable. So, that has appeared in the editorial section. This is relevant for your GS paper 2. Then, elevating India's capital goods for global electronic revolution. Now, what is this capital goods industry and why it needs to revolutionize? Now, this is relevant again for your GS paper 3. Then, India to enter into carbon credit mechanism with Japan. This is an article which has actually appeared in the international edition of the newspaper. It is relevant for your environment and for your GS3. Now, this is a story which is building up. This will end up getting substantiated and a memorandum to be signed in the near time future. Again, at that point of time, we will lay focus on this particular story. But as of now, this is the building up story that we will discuss. Then, Microsoft outage disrupts several sectors worldwide. This is something that we will discuss, relevant only for your prelims. And we are going to understand what is that blue screen of death, which was in so much news throughout yesterday. So that is something which has appeared in the front page, and Agri exports slide 3% in the first quarter. That is again something which has appeared in the international edition of the newspaper in page 13. So these are the articles that we are going to hold a discussion for today. Starting with the first article. The first article is living in denial about unemployment. Now here, while this article basically gives you a storyline, or it talks about the fact that how the government is getting misled by the data pointers presented by RBI with regards to employment generation. You would have heard about the news stories where the RBI data had revealed that for the past few years or for the past decade almost, the amount of employment or jobs generated are close to around 8.9 crores. Now, this article argues that the data is not reliable. And also it argues that simultaneously, while the unemployment figures are rising up, this data cannot be relied upon. So, let us not go into the political milieu indicated by certain aspects of the article, but let us try to understand the larger point raised by this. And the larger point that we have been discussing for the past couple of days as well is the aspect of unemployment. So here, there is a significant amount of issue with the data. Why do we need the data first of all? What is the requirement to have that accurate data? If someone is arguing that this data is not accurate, that data is accurate, do we need to pay attention to that particular issue? Absolutely yes. Unless and until we have the accurate data, then we will never be able to understand the depth of the problem. And unless and until the problem is understood, that in which sector employment is not being generated, which particular sub-region is experiencing more unemployment, unless and until that is understood with granular details, till that point of time, solution can only be on the paper and it can never be implemented. So if we want to remove any problem, get rid of any problem, data pointer and data acquisition is a must. Now, what is the issue with the data that we have? First of all, when we talk about unemployment figures and unemployment data, now that data that various government agencies they end up accumulating, that data largely ends up representing the organized sector. For example, when we talk about the periodic labor force survey, now this periodic labor force survey, basically, this is released by NSO, National Statistical Office. Now, this indicates that 55% of the workforce is employed. But you have a private organization, CMIE. Now, CMIE indicates that only 45% of the population is employed. You might think that it is only a difference of 10%. What is that all ruckus about? But then this 10% means we are talking about a population or a difference of 9 crores. So, 9 crores, basically imagine that much amount of data pointer or data discrepancy actually does exist. Now here, why is it so? Because India is one such unique country where you have a large proportion of employment present in the unorganized sector. Almost close to around 94%, 90 to 94% of the employment which is generated is in the unorganized sector. Now this unorganized sector, as you can imagine, it does not have that much amount of reportage. It does not have that accurate data collection which is carried out. So this unorganized sector significantly ends up suffering, and in the sense we don't have the accurate data about. The data that we have, that the RBI data and everything relies upon, is basically on organized sector. And you can imagine the role of the organized sector. If 94% is employed in the unorganized, then organized sector will be significantly less, isn't it? So organized sector is what is represented in the government data. Now, in order to get rid of this issue, what was being done was that the unorganized sector, how do we capture that figure? How do we understand what is the reality of the unorganized sector? So that is where the government carries out the ASUS survey. ASUS survey. Now, what is this? This is basically the annual survey of unorganized sectoral enterprises. enterprises. Now, this is one of the ways this ASU survey gives you an idea about the employment and the realities of the unorganized sector. But at the same time, you have many people working in farmlands, for example. How do you capture that? You have many of the small units here and there which seep through the cracks when you are going for data collection. So that is where the census figures are actually relied upon. But here also, we are facing an issue because the last census figures that we have with us, which is available, is the census figures of 2011. The 2021 census, that is the population and the demographic counting that is done. Now, that 2021 census has not been carried out owing to the COVID pandemic and then the electoral processes being carried out. That is where the census exercise had suffered some amount of a setback, and it will be carried out after some time. Now, due to this, we have a data pointer which is from 2011. So that does not give us a reliable information. So that is why you have such a huge discrepancy and such a huge debate around the data by various different agencies, that this data is not reliable, that data is not reliable, and so on. But what is the reality? The reality of the times is that unemployment numbers are very high. Unemployment is high. Now, we had discussed a couple of days back about the reasons for unemployment and what can be done from the government side and from the side of the population as well. But a quick recap of that. So why do we have these high unemployment numbers? There are multiple reasons for that. First of all, lack of enough opportunities, as simple as that. Now, why do you have lack of enough opportunities? So basically, for some period of time, we have seen that the public expenditure and the role of public capital expenditure in the growth of the GDP is very high, whereas the private sector is not growing at that fast rate. Now, public sector has got a very limited scope of generating employment. You cannot have the public sector day after day generating more employment, right? But the private sector has got that scope. So that is where if the private sector growth is not happening to that pace, that means there will be limited scope available. Then in our country, we also have had that unique phenomena. Not many large economies go through this, but basically we have jumped directly from the primary sector of the economy to the tertiary or the services sector of the economy. The manufacturing sector has always remained in a way malnourished or stymied. It is the manufacturing sector's growth which has the potential to generate employment in very large numbers, in bulk numbers, right? So you have the limitation of the manufacturing sector. First of all, limitations in public employment. And in this, you have to understand that the government sector can only generate so many jobs, right? And large number of youth, due to lack of opportunities in the nearby region, they basically, all of them apply for the government jobs. That is why you come across situations where for 10,000 vacancy, 40 lakh people apply, for 60,000 vacancy, more people apply. Now there is a mad rush. That is where you have other implications and other issues which crop up because of that. When you have, let's suppose, 500 people, or let's suppose 1,000 people appear, 1 lakh people appearing for an examination, you can manage that better. But when you have 50 lakh people appearing for an examination, there you need certain calibrated measures to be taken, otherwise it can spin out of hand. So that is where in almost all the government sectoral employments, you will find even PhDs, people who are doing masters, they are applying for a lower grade job just so that they enter into the government services. But the government services have limited scope to provide work. That is the reality that needs to be understood. Then slower private sector growth. Private sector growth. Then after that, you basically have stymied growth of manufacturing sector. manufacturing sector, right? The growth of manufacturing sector is not happening at the same rate. Then after that, you will also have the case where the unemployment figures are also significantly large because you have a lot of disguised unemployment which is present, and you have an over dominance of the primary sector. In the primary sector, the disguised unemployment is very high. So, over dominance of agriculture or primary sector. But at the same time, this unemployment is also attributed to the population. For example, the skill set and the skill level which is required to get jobs in this competitive environment of the world, that skill level is oftentimes found lacking. Many of the people, they have those requisite degrees, but they don't have the skill because the education system significantly is flawed at various different levels, right? So, still in our country, you will find that there's a greater stress paid on theoretical knowledge as compared to the practical implementation of what is required in the field. So, that is where you have the issue of education system, but that is always an easy blame. That, okay, blame the education system, blame the government, but at the same time, one has to understand that there is a significant lack of skill. And why is there a lack of skill? Because there is no industry to institution connect. Institutions operate in a separate sphere and a bubble on their own. Industries want people of a different requirement. So after completing graduation, people find themselves that the skill set that they have is not required by any competing industry. And that is where, due to lack of options, they are forced to enter into the sector of the government preparation. And that is where the vicious cycle again becomes. And also, lack of skill updation. Skill updation. That is also a major issue. Right. Now, for this, in order to get rid of this, what do you need? You need the country to be growing much faster. You don't need the jobless growth, but you need a growth along with the jobs. And how do you achieve that? By bolstering the manufacturing sector, by bolstering and improving the variety of services sector that we are offering. And that is where sectors such as tourism, trade, they have the potential to generate large amount of jobs. For example, the investments that are done in the tourism sector have a significant manifold return in terms of the employment provided, the employment generated. So that is something which is very much required. But at the same time, we are facing with the issue where there is a farm impoverishment which is happening. And why is that farm impoverishment happening? Close to around 45% of the population is still stuck in the agricultural sector, and they are unable to move out, either due to the lack of skill or lack of skill updation, or due to lack of opportunities. They are unable to move out of the farm sector, due to which what happens? In the same farmland, you will have 12 people working. Now, in the era of modern machineries and mechanization of agriculture, people cannot replace that efficiency. So that means lower farm productivity will also be the case, and the income will be distributed amongst those 12 people. So that is why one needs to go for diversification of even the primary sector. For example, if you have 45% of the population involved there, then diversify them. For example, promote the government schemes at the state level, at the local level, where, for example, they are given the skills of hydroponics, aquaponics. Now that doesn't require too much amount of land. And there they can end up growing some very significant value-added crops such as spices, certain grades of vegetables which can be used for the export market. Organic products are on the rise. Poultry, fisheries, meat, this is a sector in the agriculture which is growing at double-digit rate, while the rest of the agricultural sector is creeping at around 2% of the growth rate. So that is where even in agricultural sector, if we diversify that, there can be entrepreneurial abilities coming to the fore, which means what? You can have more agri-based startups. Imagine We are a country of opportunity where we have 1.4 billion population, 1.4 billion mouths to feed. And the problem is too many people are involved in agriculture. That is not the problem. The problem is too many people are involved in the conventional method of agriculture. That needs to be diversified, and thereby those entrepreneurs can then also end up generating a lot of jobs. The government on its side needs to provide the enabling system for the institute to industry connect, provide methods of skill updation and skill upgradation, and at the same time promote these startups and entrepreneurs across the country. Okay? Now, we also have to understand that if enough jobs are not generated, now that can be a ticking time bomb, and that is where it can lead to a social or a demographic disaster. India has got a 15-year time window, 15 to 20 years time window, when our population will be youthful. After that, the population will enter into the old age. And that is when the problems will start, where you will have a limited scope for economic expansion. So that is why this is our period, or this is the window of opportunity that the country needs to utilize. Okay. So overall, what have we seen? What are the issues with the data pointers with regards to employment generation? Why it is not always accurate, and even if the data pointers indicate to you something, that might not be the reality, because you have the data pointers based upon the census figures of 2011 and the ASU survey that is not very efficient. If it is carried on very frequently and regularly, it might become much more representative. What is the problem with using 2011 census data pointer? If you use the 2011 census data, there have been multiple different shocks to the unorganized sector after 2011. For example, after 2011, you had the massive NPA crisis, but then what really impacted on the ground in the unorganized sector were demonetization, implementation of GST, for example. That is what the article states, that there were 4 such disruptions. One was the demonetization, one was the implementation and the execution of the GST, another one was basically the NBFC crisis. The financial institutions, they were through the crisis, due to which the lending in the rural households that decreased, and then you had the COVID pandemic as well. So all these shocks basically means that we don't have reliable data. So we need a reliable data. And once we have that reliable data, then we can go ahead with these particular measures. These are the issues which are there. Why you have unemployment? When you have unemployment, you can have social issues, socio-political discord, etc. Okay? Now, unemployment is the biggest socio-political threat looming large over India and the world. Now, how do you answer this question? This is a 15-marker question. What are the key pointers you have to keep in mind? Now, in the introduction part, you have to talk about the fact that unemployment is significantly a major issue, and you can start with that itself. Unemployment within the country and across the world is a rising issue of discontent being observed by population, right? Or unemployment is a major issue faced worldwide due to lack of enough opportunities. That will be your brief introduction. Then when you start with your body portion, the first thing you have to talk about is the direct address to the question. That what is this threat? So, the issues due to unemployment. What are the issues due to unemployment? Here, you have to talk about the kind of socio-political disturbances that can be there, right? You can have frequent agitations and also disruptions in the social order. Oftentimes, you will have various different sentiments flared up. Then, when you have large number of people unemployed, that means there is an oversupply of labor. Oversupply of labor means what? For the same job, now you have 50 people who are present. So that means per person how much income you are able to generate, that comes down. So the wage level, the income level reduces. All these factors you have to talk about. Then this will have an impact on the human capital. That is, the education level, the health standard of the future population will get impacted, of the future generation, the young ones. They won't be able to get good education because there is unemployment. The health factors also get impacted. So that is where the vulnerable population gets impacted. That is what you focus. Then after that, the reasons for unemployment in India. Reasons for unemployment. That is what you highlight. Because it is a 15 marker, you can basically provide the way forward by the side of the government in the conclusion. But way forward, at least for a couple of sentences, needs to be provided. So here, what will you write? You will write here that basically when we talk about the various governmental measures such as skill upgradation, diversification of the labor market, etc. Now, these measures need to be taken if we want to utilize the demographic dividend that India possesses. Otherwise, we are staring at a risk of this dividend turning into a demographic disaster, which will not be beneficial for the country. Like that, you can conclude the answer as well. Try writing it in your own words. Now, the promise of parametric insurance. Now, what is this parametric insurance? What do we understand by this parametric insurance? So, when we talk about this parametric insurance, basically, what is this? When any disaster happens, let's suppose, when you have a flood, a cyclone, a wildfire, in that case, there are lots of losses. For example, now that climate change is a reality and is influencing us on our day-to-day lives, the losses due to the disasters originating due to climate change have been manifold, have been massive, right? As per estimates that in the 2023, which was one of the warmest years on record, there was a loss of close to around $280 billion from the natural disasters, out of which only $100 billion was insured, a net loss of $180 billion. Now that means the loss of properties and the loss of infrastructure and other associated losses that you have. Now, how do you ensure that there is no significant monetary or a fiscal loss associated with that? That is where the aspect of insurance comes in. Now, this insurance, when let's suppose it is based on a parameter. Parameter as in that if in a region, let's suppose there is a heat wave. Now, if the temperature increases more than 45 degrees Celsius for 2 days, then the clause is triggered that the loss of income which will happen in the factory because of this high temperature or the heat wave, I will get insurance out of this. That is how the general insurance works, isn't it? That, for example, let's suppose you get a health insurance, or let's suppose you get life insurance or the vehicle insurance, any insurance that you get. What is the principle of its working? That let's suppose if something odd happens, which is out of the ordinary, due to which I have suffered some loss, the insurance will pay me out, right? That is the norm. But what about the losses due to the climate factor and the natural disasters? That is where this insurance comes into place. Now, many of the times, for example, when you have this insurance, so what we experienced during the time of the Bhuj earthquake of 2001 was one of these awakening moments where the losses were massive, but the insurance payout was not done because it was considered to be an external factor and something not covered by insurance. So that is where people suffered losses. So in order to get rid of that, you have this term of parametric insurance. For example, you had the Turkey earthquake. There was a large sum of insurance payout. When you had the Moroccan earthquake, you had millions of dollars of insurance payout which was done. So that is how the insurance payout, when you basically put a parameter to it, right? You attach a particular parameter or a data pointer to it. That if, let's suppose, in a cyclone, wind speed is this much proportion of houses and kacha structures have been damaged, or this much flooding has happened, insurance payout should happen. If, let's suppose, excessive rainfall, that also causes losses. So in excessive rainfall, if this much amount of rainfall has happened for the past 2 days, the state automatically has to think about it that if this much amount of rainfall happens, let's suppose in the state of Meghalaya, then there will be economic losses. So the state has to calculate that parameter and then take the insurance of it. So parametric insurance is basically insurance against natural disasters, and natural calamities. Where the payout is done as soon as the parameters. Which parameters? Parameters defining the disaster. Defining the disaster is met. Okay. That is basically the parametric insurance. Now, various different countries of the world have gone for it. In India also, parametric insurance has been done. For example, Nagaland has done that parametric insurance. You have the Cooperative Milk Federation of Kerala, which has also done that. Why? Because it has been observed, and various empirical studies have also indicated that, let's suppose when you have excessive heat wave, the temperatures are very high, then the milk which is given by the bovine cattle, that basically reduces, right? The milk output reduces. So there will be an income loss. So that income loss, who will cater to? That is where that if the temperature increases by this much, insurance payout should happen. Same is the case with Nagaland also. Nagaland had got that parametric insurance against excessive rainfall. Now this is something which more and more states are getting aware of. And that is something which needs to be adopted at a larger level. In our country, we already have one such insurance, that is the Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, or the crop insurance scheme. Pradhan Mantri Fasal Bima Yojana, or the crop insurance scheme. Now in this, once you have the crop losses, then the payout is triggered. But there also, you basically have an issue that as per the scheme, for the payout to happen, you need a verification process. Isn't it? That verification process needs to be carried out. This is where the article also suggests, and the government is also thinking on the lines, that you have a weather-based insurance payout scheme, where if the weather turns to be adverse, automatic payouts can happen. So that is basically the aspect of parametric insurance. Okay. Now, the need for it, the amount of disasters are increasing, and the losses due to the disasters are impacting the vulnerable communities much more. So disasters are increasing, and we have to understand that when we talk about disasters, they impact us differently. For let's suppose a vendor who is out there on the streets. Now for that vendor who has had a kacha shop which is there on the roadside, now if that is destroyed by a cyclone, that person will expect help from the government. But there are many such vendors. How much will the government be able to help? So that is where if the government has got the payout from the insurance, then it will be of significant help. So the impact, disasters are increasing, vulnerable communities are impacted, Okay. Now what the government needs to do? The government needs to basically go through and tread through this path. So here, if you are writing an answer regarding it, you can mention the examples of Nagaland, insurance against excess rainfall, and Kerala, Cooperative Milk Society. Okay. Where the insurance is against the heat waves. Now the government also needs to basically adopt this route. But there, the government can basically follow certain steps, can follow certain measures. What are those? So first of all, it will be that more amount of parameters need to be decided. We cannot be vague in terms of deciding the parameter that, okay, if excess rainfall, give the insurance. No, that will lead to more disputes, arbitration, and eventual lack of payment. So that is where absolute precise parameters, absolute precise parameters need to be decided by the government. Okay. Other than that, there has to be a significant price discovery. What is price discovery? Basically, you ensure a bidding process where various different insurers will have a bidding. So in that bidding process, you ensure a bidding process where different insurers, they will bid that, okay, this is the amount of premium that you give, this is the amount of payout that we will give you back. So that price discovery needs to happen. Then simultaneously, you also need to cater to the retail population, that is the larger public. Larger public also loses significantly, right? So retail distribution of payout, distribution of payout. Now, when will that happen? Should it be the case that just because I am living in Odisha and Odisha is frequented by cyclone, I am sitting in my home, a cyclone has come, the government will credit some money in my account? That would have been the ideal situation. But sadly, we are not in that prosperous situation right now. So for that, you need to make the people more and the public more aware with regards to the premium payout. Okay, so awareness of the public also, so that public also pays a nominal premium and the payout is significant. So awareness in the public, amongst public, for payout premium. Only in this case will we be able to have a comprehensive insurance coverage and a significant coverage about the aspect of disasters, and the government will be able to tackle these issues. So here, what is this article about? What is parametric insurance? The concept of it, the requirement of it, the need for it, examples, and going ahead, what the government can do in order to make this a norm. And here, one other aspect that the government can also bring about is knowledge sharing. For example, Nagaland has had this insurance scheme. Now, Nagaland, over its experiences, has basically found out that, okay, we are paying a higher price. So when it is going to revise that, next time, it is based upon the knowledge that it has gained. So next time, let's suppose a coastal state like Andhra Pradesh is going for a similar kind of parametric insurance. So there, the knowledge sharing between Nagaland and Andhra Pradesh will ensure that the government of Andhra Pradesh takes a much more informed decision, isn't it? So that knowledge sharing between the states and also amongst the countries, that needs to be promoted between states, so that there is a significant amount of improvement in terms of what are the insurance that they take and what is the payout. So these are the way forward for the government, the need we have discussed, and the examples. Okay. Now moving to the next article. The next article is basically the wrong-headed policy, which has appeared in the editorial section of the newspaper. This is associated with the bill that was being introduced by the Karnataka cabinet. So that is the draft of the Karnataka State Employment of Local Candidates in the Industries, Factories and Other Establishment Bill 2024. Now this was cleared by the cabinet but was withheld soon after. Now this has created a lot of furor in the region of Karnataka from the industry bodies, from the various different top industrialists, entrepreneurs, and the public on the ground, the reaction to this bill has not been very kind. Due to this, the government has basically withheld this bill. Now, what were the provisions basically? While the bill is something which you can say is absolutely drafted, it appears to be drafted in a significant haste. It is a kind of a 4-page bill where the drafting in itself has been very inconsistent. Generally, the governments, when they present the bill, you have multiple different revisions, reiterations done by the bureaucrats before that bill is introduced. So here, first of all, a basic look at the bill that you will go for, you will understand there are grammatical errors, etc. But having said that, let's suppose we only concentrate on the idea represented and not the aesthetics of the bill. So, the idea represented is that industries and other establishments would appoint 50% of management positions. 50% of management positions. And 70% of non-management positions. Non-management. That would be reserved for the local population. And how do you decide the local population? So that is where one of the aspects which was particularly flagged off was the proficiency in language, Kannada language. That has been sought as one of the crucibles. Now, this is not the first time a state has introduced the reservation for the local population in jobs. This has been an attempt tried previously as well. But every time this has come up, the courts have struck it down. And the courts have struck it down saying that it goes against the fabric of the fundamental rights, the basic structure of the constitution. Now here, this bill, this kind of reservation for the local population, first of all, you have to understand what is the compulsion by the various different states that these kind of bills are generated or they are basically issued. So here, you have to understand the reasons behind it. The reasons behind the policy measures oftentimes tells you a larger socio-political problem which is existent on the ground. One of the reasons is a significant amount of disillusionment or disenchantment that the local population feels that when they see that the migrant population is getting jobs, while many of the local population, they remain unemployed. Now, that is something in Karnataka, for example, you have Bangalore, where you have a significant amount of migrant population. In Haryana, Haryana had also introduced this bill. You have Gurugram or Gurgaon. There also, you have a lot of migrant population occupying the jobs. Then, when you talk about Andhra Pradesh also had previously introduced that. And that was because if you take a look at the region of Hyderabad and surrounding areas. Then, after that, Jharkhand had also introduced that. Now, in Jharkhand, you have so many mining sector and industries. Now, there also, you have people from other states coming and having the jobs. So, that is where the local people, they start feeling that disenchantment. That we are not getting jobs, other people are. Right? Now, that is where, in order to assuage that, the politicians or the political class goes for the way of reservation. But here you have to understand that it is not as simple as the local population. Why won't they get the jobs? If they have the required skill set, why would the migrant population be favored? Here it is a different cycle which is at play. For example, let's consider a city A. Now, in that city A, if you have a pool of talent which is coming in, right? Let's suppose you have a pool of talent we consider from various different states who are coming to this city A. Then, if that talented pool is available, why did the talent pool come there? Maybe for education. Maybe there was some industry there and people came to apply for jobs. Now, once a new company, let's assume a company like Tesla Motors. Tesla decides that I will open up my branch in India. I will open up my base in India. Now, it has got a city A and a city B. Now, the pool of talent is present in city A. Tesla will decide to set up its base in A because it will get that natural pool. And means what? Now, once Tesla has set up shop, you will have many more smaller companies also coming towards A. Right. So first you had talent. How did you have talent? Maybe by educational institutions in that region. Then after that, organizations, companies came in. Then after that, small companies come in. Right. Now when the small companies come in, why have they come in? To cater to this pool of talent. Right. Now that would mean more people are getting attracted to that region. So that means more people from outside will come for jobs in that area. Like that, the cycle continues. This is where you have a kind of, if you want an unhindered economic growth, you cannot fix foundations that in this particular state, in this particular region, only such people will get employment. If you set that foundations, then the organizations, the companies, if you have excessive regulation, that is never good for business. Now we have those instances as well. For example, Andhra Pradesh introduced that bill in 2019. Haryana introduced the same kind of reservation bill in 2020. As late as last year, the latest state to do that is Jharkhand, which did that in 2023. Now Karnataka is trying to get into this famed list. Now Haryana, the case of Andhra Pradesh's bill is still sub judice. It is still going under in the case of the scrutiny of the courts. In the case of Haryana, the judgment has been issued and that was struck down. It was struck down on the basis that it violated Article 14 and Article 19 of the Constitution. Right. The right to equality is not maintained if you are putting reservation for the jobs, even in the private sector. On top of that, the Karnataka's bill had an issue that even Article 16(3), where you provide a kind of basis for reservation of jobs. Now that is the basis only for the public sector employment. That basis cannot be implemented in the private sector employment. So even this is something which can be violated. So you have so much amount of violations of the fundamental rights, but still the states do that. Jharkhand's bill has not, or the Jharkhand's Act which was passed, that has still not come into force. That has also been challenged in the court. Now that is because, again going back to the first topic, because of the issue of unemployment. This is where the local organizations, the state government, they have to take the onus for that employment generation. And for that, what is needed? Skill upgradation. It is not absolutely essential that you force the organization that you hire these people, but you make the people capable enough that various organizations will be tempted to hire them. Only then will we have a problem, or will we have a solution to this problem. Otherwise, we are staring at a race to the bottom, that every state will start providing that reservation, which would mean what? There will be flight of talent. And we would be staring at a situation of brain drain again, where if you don't have industry in your state, you don't have many provisions left, you have to leave the country and seek for greener pasture somewhere else. That is not a situation of economic down spiral that we want in the face of our demographic dividend. That is why skill upgradation and overhauling of the education system is a must. Okay? Now, after that, moving to the next article. This is something which has appeared in the business page, that is talking about elevating India's capital goods for a global electronics revolution. Now, electronic industry in our country, if you took a look at the electronic industry in the country for maybe couple of decades back, the situation was quite gloomy. We did not have enough wherewithal for the electronic production, electronic goods production. Now, at that point of time, China had started growing at stupendous pace, and electronic goods manufacturing was one of those key areas. You had semiconductor chips being manufactured, mobile phones being manufactured, TVs, all the Chinese goods, mobile phones and TV sets, the various equipments, consumer durables, they were flooding the international market. They were making a name for the cheap pricing. Now, This is when India basically had a lagging behind effect. However, in almost as the article says that in the past decade, our electronic good production has increased. Our electronic good production now is close to around $115 billion, which has increased by almost 4 times in the past decade, right? So, almost 10 years back, our electronics good production was close to around $25 to $28 billion. That has increased to $115 billion, which is significant growth, but a long way to go. Why? Because when we talk about the entire electronics good market, it is close to around $4 trillion right now, expected to reach a figure of close to around $6 trillion in the near future. So if you have an overall market of 6 trillion, you can imagine there's a lot of scope to grow. Now here, this article is not basically about that electronic goods, etc. This article addresses a larger issue. When you manufacture, for example, if we go to the basics, when you manufacture mobile phones, now for that, how do you do that? It is not some individual sitting with a hammer and chisel and then manufacturing a mobile phone, is it? You need complex equipments. When you manufacture batteries, you need complex equipments. When you manufacture those equipments, there also you need advanced mechanizations, right? Those are referred to as the capital goods. Those are the capital goods. Basically, those machineries, in simplest terms, think about it, the machineries which are used to manufacture various products. You would have basically seen the various factory line assemblies in mobile phone manufacturing, in automobile manufacturing, that how you have complex robotic arms and other machines doing the fabrication work, etc. Now, those are the capital goods. Now, you need to have these capital goods in order to ensure production of the other manufacturing items. In our country, majority of these capital goods, they are imported. Why? Because we don't have that expertise. The R&D sector in our country is not developed to that extent. So that is why capital goods, first of all, used for manufacturing. This is a very simplistic definition that I am giving you. Okay, manufacturing of other products. Okay, now here, most of the capital goods in the country are getting imported. Means what? We are dependent on someone else to carry out our own production process. Now that needs to change. Now, why does that need to change? And is it the case with every country? The answer is, take the example of Netherlands. You would have heard about the fact that all the countries are basically going for a mad rush of semiconductor manufacturing. Everyone wants to manufacture semiconductors now. Now that semiconductor, the machine required for making that semiconductor, most of them are imported from Netherlands across the world. Think about it. Netherlands in itself doesn't have a big manufacturing setup for semiconductors. It is not a semiconductor superpower, but it is able to manufacture the machines which will be utilized for the manufacturing of semiconductor. So once you are capable to manufacture these capital goods, then you will be able to cater to domestic demands. Domestic demands, right? You will be able to, when I say cater to, means wherever flexibilities are required for different types of manufacturing. Let's suppose in some part of our country we need different types of phones, in some part of the country we need different types. Recalibration can be done very easily. And also, their production rate can be much higher. Production can be much higher. If the production rate is much higher, that means export market is what you will be able to capture. You will be able to manufacture various different types of goods. Africa requires different types of electronic items, we'll make that. Europe requires different types of screen systems, we will be able to make that, provided we have the basic manufacturing equipment. Now there, what is the solution? We don't have those manufacturing equipments in that number. So what is the solution? So when we talk about the way forward is something that you need to highlight when you're writing the answer, is basically improve the R&D system. R&D investments need to, research and development investments need to increase. Our research and development expenditure is basically lopsided. Majority of that expenditure or investment comes from the government. When you talk about advanced economies, that is not always the case. There, the private sector in many of the cases funds that investment in research and development. And that branches off into multiple different types of products. In our country, it is largely by the government. Now, there also, the share of GDP which is utilized for R&D is very less. Even when compared to the competing economies, the economies of a similar scale, our investment in R&D sector is much low. That needs to increase, right? Then, we need to go for a well-defined IPR regime, intellectual property regulation. So that IPR, that needs to be sorted out. That will provide a kind of significant amount of intellectual property and its respect, and also better minds trying to work in that R&D. Otherwise, the biggest fear of developed people, or in the developed economies, when people try to come to India and work, the biggest fear that they have is that the patent regime is so very slow that by the time that you get the patent, maybe someone else has copyrighted or someone else has basically copied your idea. And this is something which has been experienced by many people working, that by the time that they apply the patent and by the time the patent is given to them, that idea is leaked somewhere. And that is where you have the copyright infringement, etc. In our country, we need a very significant and stringent IPR regime. Other than that, Institute to Industry Connect, something that we have been talking about since the first article and for the past couple of days. That is also cited in this article as a way, as a means to achieve that R&D, right? Other than that, the government needs to come up with certain programs to attract the best of the minds, maybe Indians only, best of the minds from abroad, to work on the basic concept of these capital goods. So here, first of all, the industry will tell the institute, all the various institutes, if you talk about the leading technical institutes of our country, they have the basic know-how, they have the generic know-how of what the machines require to have. But then that is where the industry needs to handhold them that, okay, fabricate a machine. Let's see if we are able to make a machine, because that investment can help us for decades to come, right? Similarly, government scheme and the government incentive for the best minds to come over, for know-how and people coming over. Then after that, wherever possible, go for acquisition of the organization. This is a Chinese route. Basically, China, what it did, that while it was growing up, it realized that it did not have the know-how in certain critical technologies. It would simply acquire those companies from abroad, gain that know-how, and then develop its own industry. So you can choose that Chinese route also. So that is the route of acquisition of critical technologies. Also, we need to have much more closer working between the industries abroad and India also, so that there is knowledge transfer, technical know-how transfer. Only then will we be able to develop this industry for the capital goods. But the development of capital goods industry is very much required if we need to improve the manufacturing sector base, be it automobiles, be it shipbuilding, be it mobile phones, anything. And electronic industry is one which keeps on changing with every decade. The paradigm of electronic industry maybe 20 years back was completely different. The requirements now are completely different. The technology has changed. Only those countries are able to catch up who are able to change their way of manufacturing. So just so that we don't get lagged behind, we have to change that as well. Okay? Now, the question, discuss the need to develop capital goods industry in India, suggest measures to achieve the same. So here, when we talk about in this, the introduction part, what do you write? You talk about what is that capital goods industry. Use very simple language. Don't go for or don't chase flowery language and tough vocabulary. Even by simple language, you can explain that. Now, what is that capital good industry? You talk about it. Then after that, in the body part, talk about that how this has got the potential to significantly upend the manufacturing sector. It will help the domestic sector also, the domestic manufacturers also, export market also. Greater amount of production will be catered to. So greater export means better income at India, more GDP growth. Then after you have mentioned the benefits, so first of all, the need or benefits of developing the sector. That is something that you have to mention. After that, way forward or measures that can be taken. And in the conclusion, then talk about the fact that how the key to unlocking the job generation potential of our country is the growth of the manufacturing sector, which will always be stemmed up or stymied unless and until the capital goods sector is developed. That will also help reduce our import bills, will make us, in truest of the words, Atmanirbhar. So by that, you can conclude the answer. Okay? Now, after that, another article, India plans to enter into carbon credit mechanism with Japan. Now, this is a kind of a mechanism which is still being formulated. It has got the nod of the Ministry of Environment. After the agreement from Japan, that is when we will announce a memorandum of cooperation. Now, this is a joint credit mechanism which is being developed. But before that, in very simple terms, what is this carbon credit? For those of us who are not aware, who have not covered the basics of environment till now, what is this entire concept of carbon credit? So here, understand, in order to fight climate change, many of the developed countries and various different countries, they have a cap that beyond this you should not emit. Beyond this, for example, India also, if you think about it, India has set a target for itself about the emissions, etc. It is not a stringent target, but for developed countries, that target is stringent. So let's suppose you have a country like Japan, which has got a target, okay, that beyond this you cannot emit. But Japan is emitting much more. Due to some reason or the other, Japan ends up emitting much more. Let's suppose it has emitted an extra 5 units. Okay. Now it has exceeded the target by 5 units. Now what needs to be done? So, Japan will invest in other countries. Let's suppose a country like India, which doesn't have a stringent target. Now, what kind of investment? It will invest in green sector. It will invest in renewables. It will invest in emission reduction areas, right? So, such kind of investment it will do in, suppose, India. And let's suppose as a result of this investment, if Japan is able to reduce the emissions in India, because it is Japan's investment. Now, in India, as a result of that investment, if let's suppose 10 units of emissions are reduced. How come with investment emissions can be reduced? So, let's suppose Japan has invested in newer technology for automobiles. better catalytic converters where the emission from the vehicles is much lesser. That is also an investment. Or let's suppose for power generation into solar power plants, so that the thermal power plant, the coal burning is reduced. So 10 units of emissions, let's suppose, are reduced in India. Now, as a consideration for that investment which has reduced emission, Japan will receive 10 credits. It had exceeded its target by 5 units. It has received 10 credits. So, basically it required only 5 credits to fulfill its target. It has got 10 credits. So, that is the entire concept of carbon credit and carbon trading mechanism, that you invest to reduce the emission anywhere. So, Japan and India, they are planning for a memorandum of cooperation and establish joint credit mechanism. Now, under this JCM or joint credit mechanism, you will have an empowered panel representing members of both the countries who will take decisions for the projects, whichever projects are to be implemented. Okay, so the committee will ensure, committee takes the decisions for the projects. Decisions for projects. Now, these projects, it has been agreed, will help in reducing or meeting Japan's target primarily. So, this has been established as per Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. Okay. As per the requirements of Article 6.2. Now, in this case, what happens? Basically, once the projects are decided, the funds are allocated. First of all, it will be utilized to meet Japan's own nationally determined contribution. NDC or nationally determined contribution is a target that is set by a country for its own as per the requirements of the Paris Agreement. So, the Paris Agreement, which was basically giving you a brief backdrop, Paris Agreement was signed as a result of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So, in order to reduce the global warming and limit the global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius up till 2100, that is when the Paris Agreement was signed. As per the regulations of Paris Agreement, all the countries have to come up with their own nationally determined contribution, that okay, this is how much I will contribute to fight climate change. Means what? I will reduce emission by this much, right? So, that is where the countries impose a target on themselves. So, first of all, it will be used to fulfill Japan's NDC. Then, these projects can also be used to fulfill India's own targets or India's NDCs. Then after that, if the committee agrees, in that case, the credits can also be then traded with the outside world, right? With the agreement of the committee. With the agreement, credits can be traded outside. Okay? So, that is basically the aspect of this joint credit mechanism. This will provide investment in the green sector. At the same time, it will help in generation of more jobs. It will ensure that there is a much better economic growth. Mostly, the investment will come from Japan into India, because the emissions in India are significantly high, and Japan's investment, which is happening in India anyways, Japan is investing in bullet train networks, in metro rail networks. So, Japan's investment in India is already very high. So, that is where it makes sense for both the countries that if Japan is investing, let them gain carbon credit out of it. In India also our emission levels are reducing, so we are also benefiting out of it. So, that is where it is a kind of a win-win situation for both the countries. Okay. Now, we come to a couple of articles relevant for your prelims, starting with the article and the news headline which dominated yesterday's news articles and newspapers was basically Microsoft outage disrupts several sectors worldwide. Now, you had this sudden outage which was experienced. It was initially experienced in the morning in US, and slowly and steadily that was at around 9:30 a.m. as per Indian Standard Time. It was observed in the central region of US. But slowly and steadily it spread throughout the world. Australia started reporting it, India started reporting it. In our country, you had major flight disruptions in all the metropolitan cities and metropolitan airports, and people, the airline staff, in order to ensure that the regular movement happens, they started issuing boarding passes manually with handwritten notes. Now, in many of the airports, the landing was suspended, that no aircrafts could land. That tells you the amount of utility that software has in our day-to-day life. Now here, why did it happen? Now this is something which a detailed investigation will come up with. But Microsoft on its side had generated a blog post whereby it said that it was a kind of a cyber security malfunction, in the sense that when you talk about Microsoft, now this is where it has dominated multiple articles today also. Now initially there was a blackout reported in the cloud system, Microsoft cloud system, which is the Azure system. Now that Azure system indicated a blackout. But then that was quickly and very suddenly after that was more widespread, and it was understood that the blackout was much deeper. And that was primarily based because of CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is an organization, cyber security organization, right? A part of the software setup where its aim is to provide security and secured network connectivity to those installations. Now, CrowdStrike that had employed or had deployed the Falcon security or safety platform. So this Falcon safety platform, what is it about? Let's suppose you are connected to a network. This is the hub, and you are connected through the network. You have various different devices which are connected here. Okay. Various devices which are connected here. Now, in order to maintain the safety of these devices, that is why you have the Falcon safety platform. Now, this is the endpoint terminal. So, for example, the airports are multiple terminals in the airport are connected to the larger hub. So, all those need to be provided with the safety. So, that is where this Falcon safety platform comes in. So, this organization, the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike, this is the one which had suffered the problem. And it was because of the Falcon safety platform. It is still postulated and it is still a guesswork that this would have happened because of an update, a regular software update at one of the ends would have triggered a glitch. And due to that, it would have been stuck in all the systems and the major hub would have been stuck in a closed loop. This is where all the screens, they started indicating that blue screen, what is also referred to as BSOD, or the blue screen of death. Right. This BSOD was basically, what it means is an indication of a stop error. There is some error which has occurred, where the system basically tries to identify the bug and try to fix it. Later on, CrowdStrike came up with a kind of a mechanism, a solution, but then a detailed report is still awaited. Here, what you need to understand, what is this blue screen of death, why this blackout happened, and this blackout happened as on the Falcon safety platform of CrowdStrike. Okay. Then the last article, agriculture exports slide 3% to 5.8 billion in Q1 FY25. So our agricultural exports have declined. Now the reason cited by the government why there has been a reduction in the volume and reduction in the value rather. So first is the issues in the Red Sea. The issues in the Red Sea, what it has done, it has increased the cost of trade. Okay. Cost, because the insurance required is much higher. Other than that, global prices of maize that have plummeted. Of maize that has significantly reduced, plummeted, right? And then the government had imposed a ban on rice exports. Okay, so the government ban on rice exports. These are basically the three reasons which have been cited why you have reduced exports which have happened. However, having said that, it is not as if all the agricultural sector has experienced this minimum or reduced amount of export. When you talk about the areas such as poultry, buffalo, sheep and goat meat, that has experienced an increase. Then when you talk about basmati rice in itself, the export has grown by 13%. Whereas for non-basmati, where the ban was imposed, non-basmati, it has dropped by almost the similar number. Okay, when we talk about vegetables, fresh processed fruits, etc., dairy products, alcoholic beverages, in all of that, our overall exports have increased. But in the regulated sector of grains, now there also you have to understand, why did the government impose ban on rice exports? Because last year, due to climate change, you had significant amount of reduction in the rice output. Why? Because if you recall, last year, the month of July was completely flooded and you had cloudburst in various different areas. So this is again where climate change is having an economic impact. Okay, so you don't need to remember these figures, but you need to remember the reasons, retain the reasons what can impact agricultural import and export. Okay, so this is where we'll limit the discussion for today. I hope that the discussion has been helpful and basically you have extracted some amount of information and content out of it. If you have liked the session, put that in the comment section and please don't forget to click on the like, share and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.
NCERT books are unavoidable to crack the IAS exam. Not only is the content of these books authentic, but these books also help a civil services aspirant to build conceptual clarity. And most importantly, lots of questions in the civil services examination are directly asked from NCERT books. But the aspirants often find it difficult to cover these books, or worse, they even end up ignoring these books. We at Unacademy IAS English are going to make the reading and understanding of the NCERT books easier. We present NCERT Fundamentals course, a free initiative of Unacademy IAS English. What are the highlights of this program? Comprehensive coverage of the most relevant NCERT books for the civil services exam. Prelims and mains practice questions in each session to test your understanding of the fundamental concepts. This course begins from 12th of July every day at 6 p.m. right here on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to the channel now.